What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast. And college football is back in a major way. And oh my goodness, how the mighty have fallen. Georgia Tech stuns Florida State week 0 of the 2024 college football season, 24-21. And I would be lying to you guys right now if I told you this outcome was a shocker, because it's not to me. We all knew that the game plan for Georgia Tech was simple. Stop Florida State's rushing attack and force this team to overly rely on DJU to win the game. And that happened. After that first drive, when Florida State drove down the field, they got that 2-point conversion. It seems like Georgia Tech's new defensive coordinator said, you know what? We're going to go all out on stopping the run in this game. And Florida State, after that first drive, their rushing attack could not get anything going. And once you got them into those third and medium situations, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 7, that's really when the biggest flaw for Florida State's offense got exposed, which is DJU's inconsistency and the lack of talent and depth that they have at wide receiver. We got the typical DJ Uiagalelei experience. He had some good moments, like Florida State's final offensive possession. He drives them downfield to tie the game up. He clutched up on 4th down a couple of times during that drive. But other than that, for the majority of this game, Florida State seemed like they were scared to ask him to throw the football, especially downfield. You had Ja'Kai Douglas, who got overthrown a couple of times by DJU. There were a couple of big drops by this Florida State receiving core. This was a nightmare game for Mike Norvell and Florida State offensively, because you knew that the key to you having success offensively was your rushing attack. And when that went away, your game plan got exposed. You wanted to play scared with DJU. That's what it looked like to me. You didn't want to ask him to do too much because you didn't trust him. Meanwhile, on the other sideline, Haynes King and that Georgia Tech offense, you could see the trust that their coaching staff had in him. You know, you had a few moments where you had some messed up exchanges with the snaps and the handoff, especially late in the game. I thought that was going to cost them. Once they got out of field goal range, I was like, oh my God, this is finna go to overtime. Florida State is about to pull a rabbit out of the hat. But somehow they call that screen pass, they get in the field goal range, and the dude makes the kick. And you know how it is with these field goal kickers in today's age of football. Every time it seems like they got an easy chip shot to win the game, they always miss it in the worst way possible. But kudos to this kicker for clutching up and getting it done. And also, this game doesn't have a player of the game. This was just an all-around great performance by Georgia Tech. You can tell that this team played with a lot of heart, a lot of intensity. And what really surprised me is how Georgia Tech was the more dominant team up front than what Florida State was. And you wouldn't have to expect that to happen with the kind of athletes and how well Florida State has recruited out of high school and in the portal. But Georgia Tech had their way running the football against that FSU defensive line. Jamal Haynes had 75 rushing yards, 6.8 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. And Haynes King, he was pretty impressive when he decided to run with the football. He has very good vision. He's very strong. It kind of looked like we was watching old school Georgia Tech from the glory days, 2010, 2011, when they were running that triple option. And Georgia Tech just really dominated Florida State up front in this game. On both sides, you know, they were sending heavy pressure on 3rd downs at DJU. That new defensive coordinator that they hired, he may end up being one of the best coordinated hires of the whole entire college football offseason. Don't be surprised if you end up seeing him as the finalist for the Jim Boros Award, which goes to college football's top assistant coach, because Georgia Tech's defense in this one game looked massively better than anything we saw out of that unit last year. I mean, last year, they were terrible at everything, stopping the pass, stopping the run. But in this game, it was like a complete night and day difference. I thought after that first drive that Florida State had when they drove downfield, got the 2-point conversion, that it was going to be a long afternoon for Georgia Tech's defense and that this was going to be a high-scoring game. But after the first drive, this coaching staff made some really good adjustments, and they pretty much said, you know what? If Florida State is going to beat us, it's going to be with DJU, and that's a great strategy to have. DJU is not one of those quarterbacks that can win you a game solely on his shoulders. He's somebody that, with how inconsistent his accuracy and decision-making is, you don't trust them to have to throw the football to win. And that's where Florida State found themselves in a lot of troubles. When you got into those obvious passing downs, you couldn't get anything going in the passing game that much. And Florida State just seemed like they played scared in this game. They didn't wrap up on defense. They lacked toughness and physicality. I mean, this was a really awful performance from Florida State, considering that they were a 10.5-point favorite going into this game. I took the under with Georgia Tech. I got them early when they were a 14.5-point dog, and that was the lock of the week to me because I can't trust DJU at quarterback. And this is going to be a long season for Florida State. A lot of y'all came at me a few months ago and said that I was being biased against FSU because I'm a Miami fan, when last year I picked you to go undefeated and win the ACC because you had a deep, talented group of wide receivers, one of the best quarterbacks in program history in Jordan Travis. All those guys are gone now, and you haven't recruited at a level where you just simply reload. This is going to be a rebuilding year for the Florida State Seminoles this year because they are lacking talent at receiver, and you don't have a quarterback in DJU that's good enough to carry you to wins. It's a difference when you have one of the best players in America at quarterback. Like, there's no way Florida State's offense was going to be remotely as good this year as what it was last year. Remember, the main reason why they got snubbed from the playoffs was because of Jordan Travis getting injured. That shows you how important he was to this team. Now, is Florida State season over? It's definitely not. You still have a lot of games that can be played. You still have to play up against Miami. You still have a good chance to win that game despite what we saw. It's early into the year. Adjustments can be made, but you're not going to win a lot of games when you're playing scared. Georgia Tech, the difference between them and you is that their coaching staff had faith in the players that they had. Haynes King, despite some of the easy throws that he missed, he clutched up and made some really clutch throws and some really clutch runs when Georgia Tech needed them the most. And Georgia Tech's offense was more efficient in this game than what FSU was because they were actually balanced. Although they didn't have too great of a passing display, they were able to get necessary big plays in the passing game when they needed them the most. You can't say the same for Florida State. In third down situations, Georgia Tech was the better of the two teams. And I was really surprised to see how Georgia Tech won the battle on the line of scrimmage, considering the kind of athletes that FSU recruits. And we knew that the defensive line play was going to go down a little bit, but nobody was expecting their defensive line to play as bad as what they did. I mean, Jamal Haynes was going off in this game, and so was Haynes King when he was running the football. And real early, I knew that this game was going to be close and Georgia Tech was going to have a chance after that first drive when they answered back with a touchdown on their own first opening drive. So, for Georgia Tech moving forward, you have a lot of momentum. This is one of those wins that gives your team an edge for the rest of the year. And when Nick Saban, before the game started, said that Georgia Tech was the biggest sleeper team in the ACC, I kind of agree with him. I nodded my head and I said, yeah, like, Haynes King is nice. They got some nice receivers, a really good offensive line and running back. And if that defense can end up being more improved than what it was last year, they definitely could be a sneaky team in this conference. But I'd be lying to you if I told you that Georgia Tech, I felt they were just outright going to win this game. Like, I felt like they had a good chance to win it. I'm not surprised that they won, but I am surprised at how dominant they were at imposing their will up front. You would have thought that Georgia Tech was the team that was recruiting better than Florida State. But Brent Key, he has this Georgia Tech program on the up and up. This is one of those wins that can help out recruiting, and it just gets your season out to such a great start that you're going to carry the momentum that you have from this win into your next 3-4 games. We could see Georgia Tech potentially start 4-0 with how their schedule lines up. I mean, this is a huge confidence booster. Before this game, they have 15 straight losses against ranked opponents. This defense, that defensive coordinator was a great hire. Shout out to Georgia Tech getting the win. I picked them to cover plus 14.5 2 weeks ago, and I probably should have picked them outright. I was just a little bit too scared, but it was really disappointing to see just how conservative Florida State's game plan was. It's like they didn't look like the 10th best team in college football. And I tried to tell you all that they were heavily overrated because of the recency bias. They haven't shown the consistency to be able to replicate the season that they had year after year. This definitely is a rebuilding year, and this game pretty much showed that. You're not screwed completely with DJU at QB, but you got to adjust your game plan because he's not a QB that's going to bail you out when you get yourself into a hole early. And definitely not one of those QBs that's going to win you a lot of games if you don't have the ability to play complementary football. And another negative from this loss for Florida State is that everybody has the film on what it takes to beat you. All you got to do is stop the run, force DJU to throw the football 30 plus times a game, and that's the recipe to beating Florida State. Y'all tried to call me a hater, but, I don't like being tough on college kids because, they're still pretty young, but DJU has been playing football for about a decade now. And it's like we've seen the same DJU that we saw in this game last year at Oregon State and the last couple of years at Clemson. Nothing has changed. Even if Mike Norvell is a really good offensive mind, at this point, DJU is what he is. Shout out to Georgia Tech for pulling off the big Week 0 upset. And I'm eager to see what the Yellow Jackets do moving forward. Before we get up on here, or before we get up on out of here, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Remember that we aren't just the YouTube channel. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. Check out the JT Sports Pod. Give us a 5-star review. Share with your friends, family members, and acquaintances if you enjoy. And I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.